This is What, Why, How, and I have made a modern alternate history generator. So it generates alternate history timelines from 1835 all the way through 2026 to 2200. And some of the features in this generator include a modern world map, right? So here we see 2026, but it also includes the world government types over here. Down here we can see the balance of power over time. Here we see the technological advancements, the most important years of war, the Liberty Index, so that's going to be the political orientation of the major powers. Then down here we have some other maps for different years, and then there's more detail throughout the rest of the spreadsheet. So over here are the great powers of each region, and I'll go into more detail soon, of course. Here are the percent of world power held by each of the great powers. Then over here are the alliances and wars fought by these countries over time, and that influences how many points they get. And then of course there are government types over here, whether or not the countries are influenced by foreign powers, this is their political liberty, of course. Over here is their political stability, and then over here is what economic stage they're in. So I'll go into more detail, of course, but you guys yourselves can get access to this Google spreadsheet on patreon.com/whatwhyhow. So you can either become a patron for $1 a month, or you can spend $3 and get this one specifically. So kind of becoming a patron is a good deal. But you know what? Let's go into more detail about this specific timeline, and let's generate some more additional timelines as well. So this timeline seems not very strange. America is the greatest world power in 2026 with around 66% of global power held by America. Now, power is kind of a vague term, but for this spreadsheet, for the sake of this spreadsheet, it means economic power, technological power, military power. So it's not a specific thing like troop numbers or anything like that. Instead, it's a holistic measure. So 66% of world power is held by the United States, and you can see that that is reflected in the map by the fact that America has Canada, parts of northern Mexico, still has the Panama Canal, and it has a major military base in India, which is split apart. Russia is number 2 with nearly 25%, and we can see that it holds Finland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine as well. But then over here is something interesting. So over time, the government ideologies change over time, right? So because the spreadsheet starts in 1835, a lot of countries are monarchies, and there are some republics, but over time the monarchies sort of fade away, but new ideologies pop up. So in this timeline, Russia is ruled by an ecologist government. And so for the sake of this spreadsheet, an ecologist government is one where the government rules with a dictatorial power, but in order to benefit the relationship between humans and the environment. So kind of like eco-fascism or something like that, right? But there are of course a couple communist countries as well, looks like, including South Africa, Spain, and Mexico. And there are, of course, various dictatorships, and there's a lot of constitutional monarchies in this timeline. So in this timeline, constitutional monarchies are still popular. So Britain is, of course, a constitutional monarchy. Let me zoom in so it's easier to see. There we go. So Britain's a constitutional monarchy. Ireland is a constitutional monarchy. This looks to be around Greece or maybe Bulgaria. And then parts of Africa, South America, and because India is divided, it looks like those noblemen who were part of the British Raj clung onto power, right? And there's of course one technocratic government, that's going to be Turkey. So Turkey is ruled by engineers or economists or something like that who have pretty strong power over the people, so there's few democratic checks on the government. France and Egypt are fascist, and Saudi Arabia is a monarchy, but let's scroll down. Here we can see there's Britain is number 4, Germany is number 3, Netherlands is number 5. China is all the way down to number 9, so China is not doing very well in this timeline. Maybe it's still internally unstable. But over here we can see the balance of power, how it shifts over time. Let me push that up. There we go. So, and then because this is something Google Sheets does. So if you zoom in, it might be a little bit blurry, so let's adjust that, and then it focuses in. Okay. So America starts off as not the strongest power, but it's still a great power back in 1835, which is true to real life. But then over time, it skyrockets up to become a massive power. Let's see, can we get America? This is something with Google Sheets again. Well, America controls, let's see, 1965. If we want to see the specific number, we can just scroll over here, scroll down to 1965. There we go. 1965, 85.3% of world power is held by America in 1965. So this is like a timeline where there's no Cold War. Instead, there's just America. But then America fades away over time as well. So starting in 1965, Russia looks like becomes another great power. So that by 2200, we saw America was number one, but Russia, well, this is 2026. Let's scroll down, actually. We can scroll down. Here's 1900. So America got control of the Middle East, actually. America then lost control of the Middle East by 2026, 2100. America's still pretty good. Actually, Russia is number one in 2100, but then America is still number two in 2200. So Russia overcomes America to become the world's number one superpower in this timeline. So let's scroll over and see if there were any major wars fought between the Republic of America and ecologist-dominated Russia. So this part of the spreadsheet charts which alliances and whether or not those alliances get into wars, right? So we can see the simulator starts off with Russia, Austria, and Germany in the Holy Alliance, but then over time it falls apart. So Russia switches sides around 1840, and fights against its former allies, Austria, Germany. The Netherlands sides with them, Sweden, Poland, and Persia. So Russia is not doing so well. Well, actually, see, this isn't a war. So the alliances form in 1840, but then they start fighting in 1841. Lucky for Russia, Sweden drops out, and then Poland sides with Russia. That is good for Russia because Poland is, of course, a territory of Russia in this timeline. So you can see, yeah, there you go. So when it was part of Russia, it was part of Russia's alliance. Russia switched. Poland might have been semi-independent in this timeline. So then Poland is part of the original alliance, but then it switches back to Russia's alliance. Anyway, so 1841 is a war between Russia and Austria. Russia won the war, and it didn't gain much points. Didn't gain many points. It only gained 12 points. Poland gained 1 point. So what Russia instead benefited from this war is, of course, costing Austria 240 points and the Netherlands 130 points. So Russia benefited, actually, by weakening its enemies, but it didn't gain so many points itself. But let's look at America, because that's what we're looking at. So let's scroll down. So what the simulator does is, if enough countries are fighting a war, it counts it as a world war. So let's see if we get a world war. Yeah, see, World War I in 2021, so that's a long time after real-life World War I, of course, but it's United States versus Russia. Then World War II is only a few years later, so they fight one war, they have a peace treaty, then they fight a second war, and America wins both of these wars. Let's see, World War III, America wins against Britain in 2059, so Britain is allied with Russia, it looks like. World War IV is Russia versus America again. Any World War Vs? Let's see. No World War V, so only 4 world wars, and America looks like it wins all of them. Let's see which war is the crazy. So America gained 40,000 points in 2066. That's pretty good at the cost of Russia. Let's see. Nope, nothing else crazy. Just those 40,000 points, which is pretty good for America. 25,000 in 2021. So it looks like America won both World War I and World War II. And then those are tracked. We can scroll all the way past all this data. Those are tracked over here. Most important years of war. There we go. So 1897 was an important year, United States versus Britain. And the United States won all of these wars, which is probably why America controlled like around 85% of world power by 1965. But, so 1908 is America versus Britain. 1909, the same war, probably America versus Britain. 1948, America fought a war against Germany. Then we have Russia versus America. And America won all those wars, including World War I, World War II, and World War IV, and of course World War III. So it looks like Russia probably dropped out of World War III, and America instead fought Britain, which was Russia's ally at that time, looks like. Over here is a Liberty Index of the major powers. Let's zoom out so it's focused again. There we go. Actually, let's shift it slightly. This is just a Google Sheets issue, but it's easily fixable. Okay. So it looks like, what country is this? The Netherlands was the country with the most political freedom tracked in this spreadsheet throughout most of history. America was doing pretty good, though, and this looks like Germany. So Germany did not really go too fascist. It went liberal. And we can actually track, as I showed before, we can track each government of each country over time. Let's see. Okay, so America starts in 1835 as a republic, of course. Does it change at all? Stays a republic for this whole timeline. Now, that disorder stuff is a revolution or a civil war or major riots, and that's an opportunity for the country to change government. So we can see Spain had major disorder in 1849, which is pretty close to what happened in real life, or 1848, and then became a republic for a few years. There was some more disorder afterward, a republic for a while, but then it became a monarchy again in 1878. The Netherlands started off as a constitutional monarchy, then became a republic, and then over time new types of government pop up. So Spain, if you remember, was a monarchy again, then it became a dictatorship in the early 1900s. Briefly communist, dictatorship again, then a republic, so it became liberal again, but then dictatorship, communist, and so on. And there are, of course, fascism is another country, another government type, dictatorships, which I just mentioned, technocracy, and then let's see, any ecologist governments? So the first ecological government was 1985 with Russia. So maybe there was like a major nuclear disaster or a major climate crisis or major flood or something in Russia, and then the ecologists took over. And this is a green ideology that's authoritarian. But before that, it was fascist. Let's see, anything weird? Let's scroll all the way down to see any weird results. So in 2200, Mexico and Russia and Poland and Japan are all ecological regimes. Britain is still a constitutional monarchy, France is a republic, and nothing too strange there. Persia is fascist, so fascism also includes theocracy just for the sake of the spreadsheet, so you can imagine the Ayatollahs kept power in Persia in this timeline. Well, actually it looks like they lost it, and then, well, maybe it is actual fascism, because this is after years of dictatorship and technocracy and different types of government. Let's see, 1970, oh my god, that's pretty close to real life. 1970, 1971, there's a revolution, then the fascists come to power. So maybe this is a Islamic fundamentalist, maybe it's, Persian traditionalists, that sort of thing. Let's see, anything weird? Let's look at France. France was always kind of funky. So it starts off as a constitutional monarchy, and then the constitutional monarchy lasts for a long time, all the way until 1908. And so that instability, by the way, the risk of a disorder, is increased if the country loses a war or if there's a bad dice roll. So a lot of this is randomly determined. So countries gain and shrink over time. They usually gain points, and then actually, here's something interesting. So of course there's countries in Asia and the Middle East and Africa, and those countries start off with few points. Here we can show the points all the way over here. So they don't start off with many points, but over time they might gain more points as they are decolonized. Keyword might. So South Africa does not do very well. Yeah, South Africa starts off with not many points, and then it just stays poor for the rest of time. That's pretty sad for South Africa, but it does get a little bit better in this time period. And so that is influenced by decolonization. So at a certain time period, eventually the foreign powers in each continent begin to fade away. And the reason why that is even functional is because the points of each country are tracked in each continent, right? So America has a certain amount of points. Let's scroll all the way over here to show you. America has 500 points in America, and it doesn't really have many points elsewhere except for Africa because of Liberia, so it has some influence over Africa in 1835, not much. Brazil is, of course, an American power. It has 100 points in America, but Britain, even though it's a European power, has 100 points in 1835 in America because it has Canada back in 1835. And then Africa is, of course, another continent where these European powers get an advantage because of colonization, but then their advantage fades away over time. But that's enough of this timeline. Let's refresh and try to generate a new result. Maybe something strange will happen besides an ecological dictatorship in Russia. Let's keep track. So this is going to be the second timeline. Scroll down. There we go. We can see it refreshing. So in this timeline, America does not do as well as in the first timeline. It's still a great power, but it's probably not as strong as Russia for most of the 1900s and the 21st century. And actually, so other is just a catch-all term for all the different governments besides these great powers that I've listed over here. So that could be Nigeria, it could be, the Central American Republic, it could be some random European country as well. It's just other. So in this timeline, other is greater than all the other countries, which is advantageous for all the third world countries that don't want to be victim to imperialism. So in this timeline, look at that. So America still has Canada, like the first timeline, but Russia is fascist instead, and China is a dictatorship. In fact, because Russia is so strong in 2026, which is about, it should be right over here, because Russia is so strong, they control Kazakhstan still, parts of Central Asia, and northern China. They don't control Mongolia. It's probably like a puppet regime or something like that. And then Japan, because it's not very strong at all, Britain holds a major military base in Japan. So let's see, anything strange happened? South Africa is an ecological regime. Let's see. Here we can see, so fascism is such a major force because Russia is fascist in this timeline, but it might have switched to an ecological regime around, let's see, this is 2050, so around 2050. Let's scroll down. So here we see 1900, where Germany has been reunified. Poland is a country, so Russia lost control of Poland. Austria doesn't seem very strong. It looks like Italy gained control of Bosnia and Croatia. Egypt is probably under British influence. The Netherlands still holds some territory in Indonesia. Anything weird? Nothing too weird. Then by 2026, so Russia probably gained control of Manchuria maybe around 1950 or so. Look at that. So Italy went from being a great power that controlled, Croatia and Bosnia to a tertiary, not very strong power. That's interesting. 1.3%, but only... that's too bad for Italy. It looks like that might be an error in my code. So the way I have it set up is so that if Italy has less than 0.2% of global power, and if Italy is under the influence of France, then this should be controlled by France. But I accidentally had it so that if it's not controlled by France, then it's not controlled by Italy. It's just a other power. So it should be Italy. So I'm going to type in Italy, and then the map is going to refresh. But before I do that, anything strange? Nothing too strange. Here we have Egypt being a major power. Look at that. So Egypt is number 6 in the world with 4.2% of global power. And so it controls the Middle East and Tunisia and Algeria, and Morocco looks like. And it is an ecological dictatorship. That's interesting. Brazil is also a major world power in this timeline, 7.3% of global power in 2100 and 7.4% in 2200. But let me fix this error and type in Italy. There we go. And then should be for 2100. Yeah, that should be fixed. Let's see, the map is refreshing. Okay, let's scroll down to 2026. Yep, and 2026, Italy controls Sicily, unlike the last timeline. So let's do a fourth timeline, though. Okay, let's see what's going on here. America is another superpower in this timeline, with a peak around 1930s, 1940s, so presumably if there was a World War II, looks like America lost it. So this major jump right over here, if you see that, that is probably America winning a war against all these countries that shrunk. So probably France, Russia, maybe even Britain lost a war against America in this timeline. And America is a republic, nothing too strange. Let's see. India is divided in 2100. That's too bad for India. Even though, did I make another mistake? No, India is just too weak. So even though India is a major world power, 5th in the world, it's just not strong enough to hold on to India. It is strong enough in 2026, though. So poor India lost control of southern India at some point. Let's refresh it and try to get... Look at that. So this is a much more liberal world than perhaps real life, where republics control, where most countries are republics, and there's a small fascist contingent, which would be probably Persia. That's interesting. So in this time period right here is when communism pops up. And here we see in 2026. So China probably became a communist in like 2023 or something. But then it became fascist soon afterward. And if we scroll down, look at that. So it was fascist in 2100, but then it became an ecological dictatorship in 2200. So let's generate a 5th timeline. Let's see if we get anything weird like America collapsing, which is one of the possibilities. Look at this. This is a very powerful Britain in this timeline. Britain probably beat up America around 1870 or so, but then America slowly gained power, but it was not enough. Britain is still a major world power. This is kind of like a three-way world order, right? So Russia versus Britain versus America. That is interesting. So Britain is still a major world power. Let's see how that's... Yep, okay, so 1900... Britain controls Persia, it controls the Middle East, so the Ottoman Empire lost out on that territory. Britain has Nigeria, it has Kenya, and it has South Africa. Germany actually has some colonies in southern Africa, so that's good for Germany, but Austria controls Bavaria, right? So Prussia in this timeline did not reunify Germany, instead Austria took the southern half of what we now call Germany. But Poland has much more territory than it did in 1900, around 1935 territory for Poland. Let's look around. So Japan, look at that. So Japan controls, because it's such a great power, stronger than China, Japan controls South Korea, and it controls a major port in southern India. Let's scroll down. more ecological dictatorships. It looks like Russia really loves ecological dictatorships for whatever reason. It's just a random roll of the dice. But it looks like Russia, and it converted China to ecological dictatorship as well. That is interesting. Okay, so but by 2200, Japan is still strong, but it has been overlapped in territory by China. So China controls parts of Central Asia, it controls Mongolia, it controls the Korean Peninsula, but Japan is still technically a stronger power. Germany controls Poland though, so poor Poland. Sweden is the number 2 world power, would you look at that? And it controls parts of Norway too, so maybe Sweden is the leader of a new European Union or something like that in 2200. It's even stronger than Britain. But the United States is still number 1, with only 16% of world power. So if you remember in that first timeline we looked at, America had 85%, this is only 16%, which leaves a lot more room for other countries like Russia, China, Japan, Sweden, and Britain to remain great powers with influence across the globe. Let's look to see what their ideologies are. So if we scroll all the way over here, these are the wars, and over here are the governments, right? Here we go. Governments. So let's scroll down to 2026. So in 2026, America is a republic, Brazil is a dictatorship, Mexico is in a revolution against the ecological dictatorship, Britain is still a constitutional monarchy, Russia is a dictatorship, France is a republic, Austria is a technocracy, Germany is a republic, Spain is a dictatorship, Netherlands is a republic, and so on. Anything weird? Nope. So foreign influence. Let's talk about foreign influence for a second. So if a country is weak and another country has enough power to influence that country, they fall under the sway of that country. So that might be, usually what that takes the form of is joining their alliance. So if Mexico is under the influence of America, and America decides to declare war on Britain, then Mexico might find itself in a war against Britain as well, which might cost Mexico some points. And also, if Mexico falls under the influence of a foreign power, it might lose liberty, which might cause instability, which might then cause Mexico to embrace the strongest government type of its liberty level, right? Which might be a dictatorship if America is a dictatorship. So through this system, major great powers can influence the lesser powers, right? If we go to France, look at that. So France managed to gain control over China around 1880. 1881, 1880. Oh, there we go. There's a war in 1879. Okay, so what happened is, I missed what place it was. So China was the leader of the first alliance, France was the leader of the second alliance, and France, even though it was not much stronger than China, France did win that war. And China, okay, I don't know why I missed that. I think I was looking at the Ottoman Empire. So China lost a bunch of points in 1879, and then because of that, France managed to leverage enough influence over China, maybe through getting a treaty port, maybe through influence in government policy, so that for a couple years, China was under the influence of France. But then afterwards, China becomes a sovereign nation again. But if you see these lesser powers, so the Ottoman Empire, Persia, Egypt, South Africa, Ethiopia, were under the influence of Britain, and of course India as well. America influenced Japan. Look at that, that's pretty close to real life when America sent those gunships over to Japan. Look at that. So Russia probably lost a war against America and had to pay debts. France, okay, so this is a case where France, being a republic, probably fell under the sway of their fellow Republican government, America. So maybe France toppled their monarchy and they wanted to take inspiration from America. Or maybe they just fell under the influence. So the monarchy got toppled in 1877, and then eventually maybe they didn't know what type of government to get, so American advisors came over, that sort of thing. And America probably dwarfed France by this time period for whatever reason, and that's why it was America influencing France and not the other way around. Here it tracks the most powerful type of government, the second most powerful type of government, and the strongest illiberal government. So if a country becomes illiberal, if they have a dictatorship, that dictatorship might decide to sway in a certain direction depending on which illiberal country is the strongest. So if the Soviet Union, for example, is the strongest country, a Latin American dictatorship might pretend to be communist to get favor from the Soviet Union, right? And then, of course, in that timeline, it would side with the Soviet Union, it would join the Russian alliance, and then it might find itself in a war against America. But let's scroll over and see some other features we have. So this, by the way, I guess I didn't explain this. This is the percentage of world power held by each government, and these right here are all the raw points of each country. So we can see in 1891, Britain had 20,000 points compared to America's 2,000 points, right? But let's scroll down. Yeah, by 2126, America has 15,000 and Britain also has 15,000. So Britain slowly faded away as the most powerful country, probably because, of course, India gained independence, China gained more sovereignty, so Britain's influence over those countries faded away. And that's part of decolonization that happens over the course of the 1900s. But let's scroll over. I was going to show you guys this. So this spreadsheet tracks the major technological advancements of this timeline. So in 1880, Britain, a British scientist, invented the telephone. America was the first country to land on the moon in 1977, so a bit after real life. And then America was the first country to land on Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, but then alien contact was finally made by Japan in 2197. And this chart over here tracks the strongest countries in a couple different years, so 1835, 1926, so on and so forth. This tracks the most important years of war, as I showed you before, and this tracks the liberty of each country, right? So Britain is the country that has the most political liberty, the most economic liberty in this timeline, though it looks like that's probably Spain. Egypt popped up over Britain in 2096, in 2169. So good for Egypt. If we scroll down here, Egypt is definitely going to be a republic, right? Republic, there we go. And then the country that influences, oh, that's interesting. Turkey is an ecological dictatorship. And then, okay, so some other regime controls the Suez Canal. Maybe, look at that. Probably Israel, judging from the way this map is presented. Yeah, probably Israel controls this. Well, okay, I'm getting confused. Here's Turkey. Turkey controls the Suez Canal in 2100. Turkey is an ecological dictatorship, so the Suez Canal is marked as an ecological dictatorship. Israel, though, is as well, including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, parts of Indonesia, Brazil, Venezuela, this is probably Bolivia, and then southern Norway is an ecological dictatorship as well, including Russia. So that's the ecological alliance, and then America is probably the leader of the Republican alliance, right? And Britain sways back and forth between the two. But then down here, a different country controls the Suez Canal besides Egypt, probably because Egypt is so weak, right? So it could be an international commission, it could be Israel, it could be anything, right? Maybe a rival Egyptian government controls that area of the country. Okay, let's refresh and try to see if we get a stranger result. So that's the 5th timeline, unless I missed something, so that's going to be the 6th timeline. Let's scroll down to actually look at this time. Okay, so Britain is much weaker in this timeline. Russia is instead the great power of the late 1900s. America's not doing so bad, and then this is an interesting result right over here. So this is definitely Turkey. So Turkey is a major world country, major world power in the late 21st century. Look at that. So that's what if Alteist proven right. Turkey is a great power. But it doesn't really have... Okay, so Turkey is 3rd place in 2026, but it doesn't really have much territory to show for it. So maybe it is instead influencing these different countries. So Egypt maybe has a pro-Turkish military government, that sort of thing. But if we scroll down to 2100, so Turkey has the Suez Canal again in this timeline. But then Turkey loses to Persia. Persia is the 2nd most powerful country in this timeline. Look at that. And that's because it controls the Suez Canal, it controls most of the Middle East, and it also controls, look at that, it controls Nigeria in this timeline, so good for Persia. Persia is the most powerful country in Africa, probably, right? Anything strange? So let's go over here. If we want to track which country controls which continent, we can do it over here, right? So the United States is, of course, the most powerful country in America. Russia becomes the most powerful country in Europe. Turkey is the most powerful country in the Middle East until Persia gains power in 2122. So, and then let's check to see what governments they have before we see what happened. So Turkey versus Persia, scroll over here to the governments, which is this multicolored tab. Russia is another ecological dictatorship. I guess ecological dictatorships are just randomly very popular unless I made a mistake in my code, in which case I'll fix it by the time you guys get it. Okay, so Russia is ecological, but we wanted to see Turkey. And so Turkey is a democratic republic, and then Persia is too. So democratic peace theory is bunk. Instead we have Turkey versus Persia, 2 democracies, 2 republics, fighting for control of the Middle East. Okay, then we can scroll over here and see if there are any wars. So there's no wars actually, it's a time of peace. So Persia is just doing much better than Turkey for whatever reason, economically better, scientifically better, and it just surpasses Turkey. Actually, Turkey... Does Persia ever fight any wars? So 2113, it fights a war against Germany, maybe over international trading routes, that sort of thing. Persia is, okay, so Persia lost a war in 2061. Is this a world war? I don't know why I'm looking over there. It is not a world war. Poor Persia, look at that. But Persia is mostly peaceful, lost some wars when it was probably influenced by another great power, and then afterwards it mostly stays out of the way of other people. Except for over here, look at that. Okay, so that's probably a major war. So this is after Turkey is the strongest power in the Middle East, and then it fights against Turkey with America and Britain and Sweden and India all on its side against Turkey, so Turkey falls. That's probably why Turkey is pretty weak in this timeline. And we can actually scroll over here and see the percentages of power held by each country, right? So Turkey, Persia, look at that. So Turkey dropped down from 6.62% to 5.8%, and it used to be 8.95%. And then Persia jumped up to 6.48. Maybe I'll zoom in so you guys can see that. There we go. So it drops down from 9% down to 5-ish%, 6-ish%. And Persia goes from 5-ish% to 9-ish% over here. 16%, so good for Persia. So each of these timelines is, of course, there's no specific details. I don't have, well, there are a lot of specific details, I guess, but there's no like, this is the specific war over which specific thing. It's instead saying they fight a war and this is the result. So you yourself, using the power of imagination, can imagine the specific inciting incident, that sort of thing. But because it's Russia, because it's Turkey versus Persia, it's probably over control of Armenia or maybe Iraq, that sort of thing, right? That would make sense. But let's refresh and see if we gain another strange result. Timeline 7. Scroll down, and that is a very powerful Russia, wow. And I even have it set up, actually. I just kind of hit my table. I have it set up, actually, so the greatest power kind of weakens over time because of overextension, right? So it needs to fund all these military bases, and then other countries can pluck and bite at its heels until it is no longer the great power. But besides that, despite that, Russia is very powerful. And what instead happens is America becomes the great power instead, it looks like. I wonder if they fought a war, but let's see if there's... Okay, so this is a typical Cold War sort of scenario, right? So Russia is a communist country, but it does not have control over Europe. Instead, Europe is probably a site of contention between the two, right? But it does have a lot of influence over Africa. So it has influence over South Africa. It has influence over Nigeria, over Guinea or whatever country this is, Venezuela, Peru. This is probably the Philippines, so Philippines as well. And of course, I can't have a gigantic map. I kind of want a gigantic map in the next one, which might be a world history from 3000 BC to 2020, whatever, maybe 2200. I'm going to have more detail, but because I don't want to strain the spreadsheet too much, and I want you guys to actually be able to use it, the map is kind of small, but that's what it is. You can imagine that this is Somalia, this is Oman, that sort of thing. You can use the power of imagination. Portugal is an ecological dictatorship, though, which is, of course... So Russia is only a communist country, pretty briefly actually. Okay, nothing too strange in this timeline. But China, okay, so China versus Russia is probably a battle happening over here. Anything strange? Oof. Look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not doing well. How many points do they even have? It rounds to 0. Okay, let's go to 1968. Ethiopia only has 7 points. Oh my god. Poor Ethiopia, that is not good. It goes down to, 3 points. That is not good. It just never does well. Poor Ethiopia. And then it hops up a little bit, so that's good for Ethiopia. But only 58 points in 2200. That's barely sovereign. That's like Central African Republic level of power. South Africa as well is only 9 points, but that's back in the 1840s, so that's back when it was a British colony. That makes sense. India, 7 points. That's not good. Poland springs up. So in this timeline, Poland probably got independence from Russia because of some civil war or some intervention by a foreign power or something like that. But even though Poland starts with less points than India, Poland quickly surpasses India and South Africa and Ethiopia. So poor Ethiopia, wow. So it's definitely under the influence of some foreign power, right? Let's scroll over and see which foreign power actually. We can do that. It's the power of this spreadsheet. This is probably making you dizzy, but whatever. Okay, Ethiopia. Under the influence of Russia. Germany, briefly. Italy, good for Italy. Austria, Russia, the Netherlands, USA, so Ethiopia is just constantly getting L's in this timeline. Damn, poor Ethiopia. Okay, but let's refresh. And the reason I have Ethiopia and South Africa, even though they're kind of not very strong countries, is because maybe they might spring up. That is not unusual, especially because they're African countries in Africa, so they might gain a lot of influence over fellow African countries. Okay, but let's do 8. Timeline number 8. France. Okay, in this timeline, France is the strongest country in the world for much of the 1900s into the 21st century. So it controls the Netherlands, good for France, in 2026, and when you scroll up, you can see that over here. And that's probably because, I don't know why specifically, it might be any possible reason, right? But it looks like it didn't hurt that Germany was not reunified by Prussia, but instead Austria. And Austria and France, of course, have a common nemesis in Italy, so they can stand to gain, they can stand to make an alliance, right? But France is 3rd, then Russia drops way down to 6th place in 2026. Instead, it's France, and Mexico is 3rd place. Look at Mexico. Does France? Nope, France drops down to 8th place. Mexico is number 2 in the world in 2100, and number 2 in 2200 as well. So that is good for Mexico. China is number 3, so maybe America and Mexico versus China. But China is a republic as well, so in this timeline, governments are much more liberal, much more democratic. Because Mexico is a stable republic, China's probably a bit stable too. Well, they were a dictatorship in 2100, but by 2200 they're a republic. India is a republic as well, but there's a little bit of fascism right here because it does not have enough power to control the south of the country. Turkey looks like it's in the middle of a revolution, so we don't know what's going to come out of that. Libya is a fascist country, though, and France is in a revolution as well. So let's see, did France lose any major wars? France won this war. Look at that. So France and America found themselves fighting major wars, and France just gobbled up America's influence. So maybe America had to pay a huge war indemnity or something like that to France. But then Mexico popped up, so I wonder if Mexico won any major wars. Let's look at that. So we can scroll over here. This is the percentage, of course. This is the raw point total. And here are the alliances, right? So we want to scroll over here to war gains and war losses to see if Mexico had the opportunity to gain a bunch of points. Now it's random, of course, right? So these are the caps of the points gained and points lost. And then in the total points that are calculated way off to the right, it's between maybe 10% or 20% of the total, right? Actually, it's between 10% and around 5% of that number. Because, of course, a country's not going to lose its entire existence in 1 year of war unless it's very poor. Even though America swept over Mexico, Mexico still continued to exist as a country, right? So because it's a holistic measure, it's also economic influence, it's also cultural influence, and Mexicans were not just evaporated in what year was that war? Was that 1848? Alexa, what year was the Mexican-American War?
The Mexican-American War started in 1846 and ended in 1848.
Yeah, 1846 to 1848. Okay, but we were looking to see if Mexico gained a bunch of points. It actually lost a couple points over here against America. So these two countries were butting heads across the Rio Grande. It looks like Mexico. So it seems like, ironically, so I keep checking to see if these secondary powers lost or won any major wars that caused them to boost, but I think the winning strategy in this spreadsheet is to kind of lay low and let your economy develop over time, right? And in that case, you don't find yourself as a secondary power stuck in a war against a major power, right? If you stay neutral, you can build up your economy, and by the time you have to fight a war, you have enough strength, where if you lose the war, you don't completely get toppled and get sent down to 8th place like Russia, right? But let's look at our 9th timeline. I'm just gonna keep doing this. I don't know when to stop. I'll just keep looking at timelines. Okay, in this timeline, China looks to be pretty strong, but that is not very exciting. India is doing pretty good. Let's see, did India have enough strength to hold onto its country? No, it did not. Poor India. Just not strong enough. R.I.P. India. I know all my Okay. I take that back. India had enough strength to keep control of India, but it looks like Sri Lanka is occupied by Russia. So even though India is the fourth strongest power in the world, Russia as the strongest power might be bullying India around a little bit with its ally, China. And they're all dumb. Oh my god, finally we get a American dictatorship, and we also get a communist Canada. Oh, well, look at that. Because America was communist in 2026. Oh my god, we get a communist America. Okay, let's look to see what happened. We go all the way over here. And if you ever get lost, you can just look up here. This is where. But okay, let's look at America. So America was a republic for much of this, and then in 1945 it became a dictatorship. So what happened? We can look over here. And this is the liberty index of each country, right? So America started off with 50% liberty, and that's because even though it's a liberal democracy, there's a lot of slaves still. So America might get a boost in liberty if there's some sort of instability. And instability, so the disorder thing, might trigger a boost in liberty or a nerf, a subtraction of liberty, right? So, but America got a boost in 1856, but then it boosted back down in 1865, and it just kept... Well, it actually went up a little bit, but then look at that, so it went down. So I wonder what happened. 1940, scroll over here. Yeah, so America just suffered a bunch of instability in 1939, and that caused it to shift towards a dictatorship. And once a country is a dictatorship, if they just keep becoming more and more illiberal, then they're just going to stay a dictatorship. So America became... Look at that, it's never too... Oh, look at that, that's pretty low, 19.50. That is less liberal than China. In 2011, we go down. America gets shifted up a little bit, but then it gets boosted down. So maybe it's falling under the influence of a foreign power or something like that. So by 2200, America is not looking to be a very free country. Instead, Brazil, Mexico, Britain, Russia, France, Italy, Sweden, all these countries are more free than America. And look at that, the freest country is South Africa. Good for South Africa. It shifts from being a colony with very little control over its own government to a free, independent, and sovereign democracy. Let's look at that. Yeah, it's a republic too. Good for South Africa. But America is a dictatorship, which is very sad. It's a communist dictatorship for a while, and there's even an ecological regime from 2003, 2011, 2019 looks like. Very interesting. Anything strange? Let's try to get a tertiary power to become a great power. So in this timeline, America lost a couple wars. It fell to dictatorship. China, a republic, a democratic republic, is the most powerful country. But let's refresh to generate our 10th timeline. And maybe like Mexico will be the strongest country, right? Maybe they'll finally go over America. Let's scroll down so we can see the chart updating. That's going to be Austria. So Austria is a great power in this timeline. But then it fades away. Poor Austria. Look at that. So because America and all these countries are so weak, a lot of other countries have room to be sovereign and wealthy. Ooh, look at that. So Italy is very weak in this timeline in 2026. Let's scroll up. I'll even zoom in for your benefit. Let's zoom in. There we go. And then, well, I guess I zoomed in the whole page, but whatever. You can see it. France controls Italy in this timeline. So Italy is very weak and it's part of some sort of union with France. But Austria controls Bavaria and Bosnia, so the Austrian Empire survives in this timeline. Let's reset the zoom though. Okay. And there are republics, and Austria is communist. Oh my god, so this is like some sort of Danubian socialist republic or something like that. Interesting. And they're probably allies with the Soviet Union, which lost control of Ukraine, which is a technocracy actually in this timeline. But let's do 11th timeline. I want a country to be more powerful than America, and not a usual country. Let's scroll down. I want you guys to see that. Russia's doing pretty well in this timeline. Look at that. Pretty big Russia. Another ecological dictatorship. Maybe I'll make those more rare. I guess you guys have to, go to patreon.com/whatwhyhow and purchase or subscribe, and you can see how rare I've made these different government types. Basically no country except for little old Poland is fascist in 2026, and that is true to real life too, actually. That's a joke. Okay. America's still number 1. Lame. Let's do our 12th timeline. Scroll down. Another Russia, and you know what? This is only realistic. If I made it so Russia or America were always some weak tertiary power, I might get some weird results, but that wouldn't be very realistic because Russia and America are such large, powerful countries, China as well. So I actually gave each of them a boost because they have such a large population. India, I think, might receive that boost as well, but you wouldn't really know it from their performance. This is going to be Egypt, probably. Let's scroll over here. Let's scroll down. Oh, it might be the Netherlands. Oh no, Egypt. I was right. I should probably update the colors because Egypt and Spain look so close together. Spain, I think, is more like a kind of warm, reddish orange, right? Not necessarily this faded yellow color. So let's go down here. Let's go over here, conditional formatting. This is the conditional formatting for each country. There's a little bit of a behind the scenes thing. So let's go to, did I just miss it? Where's Spain? Spain. And let's make it a more warm, reddish orange, right? Kind of like over here. That's a bit close to India, so let's make it even a little bit more red. Maybe that's a bit too red, that's a bit too pink. Over here a little bit. There we go. Maybe a little bit more yellow, that's too close to India. Let's do that. Let's let it update for a second, and we can see Spain will change colors. There we go, so Spain is now a different color, so we can tell the difference between Egypt and Spain. And of course, because this is just Google Sheets, and I can edit it while you guys still have it, I might make updates over time to make it more realistic, to tweak some of the dials that go into this, to tweak some of the, of course, aesthetic stuff, so changing the color of Spain, for example. Let's change it with this graph too. Edit chart. And of course, you guys can make something like this yourself. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to let you guys edit this spreadsheet because someone could grief it, right? But maybe you could take inspiration from it. I wouldn't really mind, as long as you don't copy and paste the whole thing, right? Spain is number 4, so I guess that's why I was paying attention to them, right? If I was scrolling down... No, that was a different timeline. Actually, was it? I'm confused. Whatever. Egypt controls Algeria. I said that again. Egypt controls Morocco in this timeline. Okay, let's do our 13th timeline. This is my lunch break, so I can just do this for the whole hour. Okay, in this timeline... Is this Poland? It's probably Austria. Maybe I should... yeah, it's definitely Austria. Let's scroll up. Yeah, Austria is number 2 again, so good for Austria. So in our timeline, Germany is, of course, a very wealthy, prosperous country. Maybe if Germany won World War I or won World War II, it would be the strongest or second strongest country in the world. In this timeline, we have Austria instead. Now, Austria gains control of Bavaria, it keeps control of Slovenia and Croatia and Bosnia, and it's still the number 2 world power. But Russia is number 3, even though it lost control of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. Let's do 14. I want a strange result. France is doing pretty well in this timeline. Is that India? Please be India. I think that's India. Yeah, because this is other. These are the African countries. This is Turkey. This is China. That's Japan. And this is India. So India might be the strongest country. Not in 2026. Not in 1900, of course. Not in 2026. Not in 2100. It's number 2 in the world, stronger than America. Look at that. We have an Indian world power at last. So India controls Pakistan, it controls Bangladesh, it controls Afghanistan, it controls Singapore, it controls Papua New Guinea, and it has a major military base in Japan in this timeline. So India is doing pretty well, and India is a communist country. Look at that. So in these timelines, by the way, guys, you can have infinite different possibilities, infinite different idea-generating possibilities, because in this timeline, as we can see, India is the second strongest country in the world, and it is a communist country, and it actually probably has influence over South Korea, influence over Persia, influence over Greece and Bulgaria and Serbia, or Bosnia, whatever this one is, Tunisia, that's Tunisia over here, Algeria, the Suez Canal probably, Algeria, did I just say that? Northern Peru, all these different countries are under the influence of India, and Russia is fascist. So let's look over to 2200, and let's see if India and fascist Russia are on the same alliance team, on the opposite alliance team. Let's look, because it's going to be a three-way Cold War if not. India is neutral in 2200. Good idea for India. But, okay, this is a major world war in 2168, I bet. Because you have Brazil, France versus India, and Japan, and Egypt. Not a world war, look at that. It's just not enough. Actually, there's three world wars. 1934, America versus Russia, that's pretty typical. India, does India get into any major wars? Let's scroll over here, and we can see India's column. India gains some over here. It's probably fighting against Pakistan or some other non-important power. And then it's just at peace. Look at that. Well, actually, okay, this is a major war against France in 2068, which we already saw. And then look at that. It just keeps happening. Remember what I said earlier. When a unexpected country becomes the number 2 or the number 3 or the number 1 world great power, it's probably because they didn't get involved in a dumb world war and spend all their money dying. Instead, they fought against tertiary powers with no great power on either side, except for their own side, of course, meaning them, and that's how they gained power. Okay, let's scroll up, and let's generate our 15th timeline. I want to keep rolling the dice until I get a strange great power. And sometimes it does happen. It's pretty rare because that's realistic, but sometimes Brazil... Actually, we saw Brazil being number 2, right? Or was that Mexico? In either case, sometimes we get strange results. Look at that. Okay, so none of the great powers do very well in this timeline. Instead, every other country in the world does very well. So who is the strongest country? It's probably something weird. Let's scroll down. France is the strongest country in 1900. Russia in 2026. 2100 is Russia still, a technocratic Russia. 2200, finally we get something weird, and it is Turkey. And that's because America is doing so badly in this timeline. So even though America controls Canada, it's probably in a state of constant instability, constant civil war, that sort of thing. As we can see, there's disorder in 2200. So that means Turkey is the number 1 world power in 2200. It controls Armenia, which is not good for Armenia, and it controls Somalia as well. And a neutral force probably controls the Suez Canal, which means Turkey can access this area. And it probably has influence over India, probably has influence over Africa. Let's scroll over and see. Actually, look at that. So even though Turkey is the strongest single country in the Middle East in 2200, it's not strong enough to become the greatest power in 2200 in the Middle East. Instead, all the other countries are in a coalition or some sort of alliance or some sort of international agreement, which means that no single country can dominate them. Same thing for America, but China, shout out to China, is the greatest country in Asia and has influence over all the other countries of Asia. So sometimes even countries fall under the influence of other, right? So maybe an international coalition or something like that. So we scroll over here. Sweden was under the influence of another country, so maybe just, the United Nations or something like that. Turkey, where am I looking? Turkey is under the influence of Turkey. So Turkey is a fully sovereign country, but Persia is maybe part of a United Nations coalition or something like that. Same thing with Same thing with South Africa, same thing with Sweden, same thing with Spain, same thing with Austria and Britain and Brazil. In fact, look at that, poor America probably lost a war against China in 2191, and then it fell under the influence of China for almost a decade. Okay, let's do one last timeline. We got a Turkey timeline that's pretty cool. Hopefully this is a weird timeline. Timeline number 16. Let's scroll down. America is way too powerful, would you look at that. Russia becomes the next great power, though. Look at that. All the real estate held by the other is just gobbled up by the great powers. So that's Russia versus America, a longer-lasting Cold War between a republic and the technocrats. So that's going to be ruled by engineers, ruled by economists, that sort of thing. Let's go to 17, though. Oh, and also, by the way, shout out to myself, because I have a video on the technocrats, by the way, if you want to learn about them. Just Google what, why, how, technocrats, or search it on YouTube. That might get you there easier. And by the way, while you're searching for me, why not search for patreon.com/whatwhyhow. I just snuck in another timeline, didn't I? And this is another timeline where the other countries are doing pretty well. Woe to the great powers. Let's do one more. I want a strange result. Come on. The Netherlands does pretty well in this timeline. Does it control northern Germany? It does not. But it just does very well. Oh, that's India. What am I talking about? I will update. You know what? I'm going to update the colors so it's easier to tell the difference. By the time you get this, different colors. Let's do one last timeline. Just kidding. We're going to add two more, but let's do 19. Britain is doing pretty well. Look at that. Is that going to be Brazil? I bet it's Brazil. Or I bet. See, that's another thing. I need to update these colors. It's different on my actual laptop. I'm doing this on a monitor. It's a bit harder to tell the difference. I'm going to create some more contrast. But that is Turkey as a great power again. It doesn't really control. Oh, look at that. It controls parts of Arabia, parts of Yemen, parts of Somalia. What are we talking about? Parts of Oman. And finally, look at that. France controls the Strait of Istanbul. And also controls Italy. Shout out to France. Okay, one last timeline because I'm actually hungry. This is my lunch break and I spent the whole time talking about the spreadsheet. Let's do the 20th timeline. Something strange, please. Gigantic America. Would you look at that? Oh, when it falls back down. And that is definitely Brazil because it's right next to America. So does Brazil get anything neat? Nope, Brazil is still not strongest enough. Still not strong enough. Poor Brazil. But America gets, how much power is this? We can actually look over here. %85%. That's probably about the strongest a single country can get in this spreadsheet. Okay, let's do one more timeline. Just one more. You guys ever play like Civ or something like that where it's the one more turn thing? That's this. Okay, 21 is definitely the last one. Another oh no, okay, come on. We gotta do one more. Let's do 122. If you have survived this long watching this, shout out to you, shout out to all my fans. Thank you very much for all the support, and if you want to continue supporting the channel, you can do so on patreon.com/whatwhyhow. For $1 a month, you can get access to this, and of course, early access to future videos. And the people who are already in the Patreon are on the screen now as I wildly scroll around. Okay, let's do one more timeline. 23, come on. Ooh, Mexico is doing pretty well, actually. What the fuck am I talking about? That's Italy. Italy's doing... Okay, I definitely need to update the colors. If there's one thing I've learned from making this video, it's that I need to update the colors so people can tell the difference between them. Look at that. The ecologists control, like, over 50% of world power in that time period. Does America... Okay, we have an ecological dictatorship in America in 2026, and a communist dictatorship in America in 2100, and they're just going through all the colors of the rainbow, looks like. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Look at that, Big Turkey controls most of the Middle East in 2200. Okay, I'm gonna keep getting distracted. I gotta eat lunch. Thank you very much. Oh my god, see, I'm tongue-tied. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I got more stuff coming up. I got a debunk of either Ben Shapiro or Professor Zhang, quotation marks on Professor, or maybe the Podcast Bros, but I got more videos coming up, so subscribe. Check out patreon.com/whatwhyhow to get access to this product. Thank you very much, and adios. Wouldn't it be funny if I was recording the wrong screen the whole time?